had to record that. I'm going to say that again for the recording. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to Backyard Habitat for Urban Wildlife, presented by Brandon Berger of Backyard Bird Shop. This presentation is co-presented by NatureScaping of Southwest Washington and the Camas Public Library. My name is Elliot. I'm from the Camas Public Library. Just want to let you know a few details about the event before I turn things over to Marlene of NatureScaping of Southwest Washington. Just want to let you know that this event is being recorded and everyone who has registered for the event, I'll be sending out an email that has a link to the recording in case you missed it or you want to share it with a friend. The recording will live on the YouTube page of the Camas Public Library. So you can be on the lookout for that. Then I want to let you know about the Q&A period. Brandon's going to give his presentation and then we'll open the chat function for questions. So we'll wait till after the presentation. So if you have any questions, just hold on to those until the end. Right now, the chat feature is not live, so I'll turn that on at the end of the presentation. So that's all for me. I'm going to turn things over to Marlene right now.
Hello, everybody, NatureScaping members and non-members. Normally, our classes would be as a benefit of membership to our NatureScaping members. But for Zoom purposes, we're opening it up to everybody. So anyone who is not a member and who appreciates these Zoom webinars, if you would like to make a donation, we'll be happy to accept it at our website on naturescaping.org. And I won't, you could also sign up if you are interested in receiving our newsletters. You can always indicate such through our contact sheet on our website, naturescaping.org. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Brandon at Backyard Bird Shop, who knows more about himself than I do. So I will let him introduce himself. And thank you all very much. I hope you get to visit the Wildlife Botanical Gardens, which if you're not familiar with NatureScaping, we are the not-for-profit organization that maintains the Wildlife Botanical Gardens in Brush Prairie, Washington. It's a 3-acre property with 10 distinct garden rooms. And please come and visit us. We are open every day from dawn to dusk, no fee. So feel free to come and explore. Thank you very much. Now to Brandon.
Hello, as stated, I'm Brandon Berger with the Backyard Bird Shop here in Vancouver. If you don't know where we're located, we're over across Thurston Way from the Vancouver Mall in the same parking lot as the Olive Garden and TJ Maxx. And we have just about anything you could dream of for the backyard wild bird enthusiast. So today we're going to be talking about habitat for urban wildlife. Which is actually pretty good timing considering the heat wave we're currently experiencing. Good backyard habitat is really important for animals, both birds and mammals and amphibians, reptiles, insects, all benefit from having a good diversity in a yard rather than a monoculture. And that's will be where we're going to start. So there's two different takes on landscaping. There's the common societal perception, which we see in our urban environments everywhere. Well-manicured lawns, borders of ornamental flowers, crystal clear water features that never really get algae or anything like that growing in them. Hedges that are very much trimmed down to the minimum and shaped to be attractive to our eyes. Precisely pruned trees, and we usually always pick up and remove any leaf litter that is left from our various plants in our yards. But the wildlife friendly perception is to have a diverse ground cover, so not just grass on your lawns, have clover, low growing plants such as salal, things like that. And have a layer of succession rather than just a border of ornamental flowers, which means having Again, the grass followed by small herbaceous plants such as flowers, moving on up into small shrubs to small trees, and then continuing on up from there into the canopy region of larger trees. And all of these different areas serve to provide habitat to different sorts of creatures. Chemical-free ponds and waterfalls without bleach or any harmful chemicals, so that the animals have access to clean drinking water as well as water to bathe in, and to just use for their quality of life. More natural rows that aren't really trimmed back to perfection. That offers much more habitat for birds to nest in, animals to escape predators, things like that. And a really big, important part of habitat that we definitely remove from our urban environments usually are dead branches, logs, and snags. A dead tree hosts and offers more life in it than a live tree ever dreamed of offering. And going along with that is leaf litter. Leaving leaf litter to naturally break down under diverse layered succession. It conditions the soil, the nutrients go back into the ground rather than being scooped up and moved away elsewhere. And it's just really important habitat too for fall and winter animals to escape cold, freezing weather. Lots of smaller insects and things use leaf litter to dig down into and stay warm when they're hibernating. So the difference between these two perceptions, of course, is monocultures versus habitat. Monocultures are where we have a single species that we cultivate, such as bluegrass for lawns, just one or two styles of wildflowers and ornamentals. It's just low diversity. There's very few resources available for animals to use in a monoculture yard. There's little to no shelter because we remove most of it. And it has a very low critical population point. So a monoculture yard can only support a very small amount of wildlife. So if you have a well-cultivated, well-manicured yard, you tend to see fewer different species of animals. Where habitat is the access and availability of food and water, shelter and cover, as well as space for a larger population. And we see that with habitat versus the monoculture is with the diverse ground cover. We have lots of available food in the form of berries, insects, seeds. Layered succession gives us lots of cover for habitat to live in. Again, lots of food. Chemical-free ponds offer habitat for amphibious animals as well as all our land-based animals that require water to live. Natural hedgerows, again, same thing, lots of habitat, lots of food can be provided by natural hedges. Many birds can eat waxy berries that would be necessarily toxic to humans or mammals, but birds are able to digest them safely, and that sort of thing grows in a lot of different hedges. Dead branches and logs and snags are probably the best and most important type of habitat to provide animals, simply because, like I said, a dead tree hosts so much more life than a live tree does. Not that live trees aren't important, they are very important, providing us with oxygen as well as lots of places for animals to live, and they produce food where a dead tree doesn't necessarily produce food on its own. It's the critters that move into it that produce food. And then again, the leaf litter being at least some of it left to break down naturally, rather than removing all of it. You know, if you have a space of lawn and you don't want the leaves in it, then, you know, it's fine to clear it out. But if you have a space under a lot of trees or hedges, it's a good idea just to let that leaf litter break down as it would naturally. And here we see an example of a monoculture versus habitat. On the left, we have a yard that is well manicured. It just has some plants and some bushes, probably flowers along the edge, a single tree in the yard, or just a couple trees with very little other habitat around, well manicured. So the lawn's always kept short. It's not allowed to grow large enough to produce seed or any other sort of habitat or food for animals. Where on the right we see the same yard, but it's been landscaped for wildlife. We see multiple trees in the background. The flowers aren't limited to just the very edges of the yard. The bushes are spread throughout. And as you can see on the far right of that black and white picture is an example of succession, where we start out with the lawn, we go to small herbaceous plants, then to woody bushes, small trees, and then up onto large trees. And the picture below is a good example of a successive yard. As you can see, it's got all those qualities. It has small bushes, just some grass area, small trees leading to large trees. Behind it's a nice open meadow, which provides for some species. But all of this here would provide great cover for animals that would utilize that meadow to escape predators and other rain, weather, anything that could be harmful to them. And they can seek shelter and all that greenery. Where in the one on the left there's not really a lot of places for animals to get away from that there's not a lot of places for them to get out of the weather with those perfectly pruned trees. They don't provide much cover. The lawn provides little to no cover. There's just really no place for them to go on that property. And so simple things we can do to improve the habitat in our yards is we can layer plants to mimic natural habitat, provide moving water, whether it's just a bird bath with a bubbler in it, or if you actually put in a small pond with a waterfall or something like that. Moving water in nature means fresh water, where stagnant water is often not healthy. And so moving water, especially that sound of moving water, is a huge attractant to bring in many birds, many mammals, lots of insects. Another nice thing about the moving water too is it also helps prevent some of the pest insects that we are constantly fighting against. In particular, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes require a still body of water to lay their eggs in and for their larvae to be able to breathe. Moving water drowns mosquito larvae. Mosquito larvae actually breathe oxygen, and they have to attach to the underside of surface tension. And moving water doesn't provide the surface tension they require to stay connected to the very surface of the water, and so they end up sinking and drowning. Native plants that produce lots of seeds and fruit and things like that. Whoops. Trying to move my picture here so I can read what's under it. And nectar. So lots of native flowers like bleeding hearts are a great source of nectar for animals. Some of our local ground cover, salal and whatnot, produces fruits and berries and seeds. And then of course, if you do have pest problems, insects and whatnot, there's lots of natural pest controls out there you can use that don't require harmful chemicals that build up in our system and end up harming wildlife outside of our yards as well. Some examples are beneficial nematodes, which are a microscopic animal similar to a worm. But they tend to eat all the larvae and the eggs of many other pests, such as cabbage root weevil, crane fly larvae. They're a great way to combat fleas. They eat the flea larvae, tick larvae. So they're a great source of natural pest control that anyone can add to their yard in the early spring and fall during a slightly cooler weather. Ladybugs, of course, are another great source. They eat aphids and all sorts of soft-bodied pests that may damage or destroy your plants in your yard. One thing we don't really recommend, although it's often sold as natural pest control, are praying mantis. Praying mantis, most of the ones that are sold are actually a species that have been imported from China. They're not a native species of praying mantis, but also they're an indiscriminate killer. So while they kill lots of bad bugs and bad things that are pests to us, they also kill a lot of good. They will, anything that they can pretty much get their little claws on is fair game food for them. They'll take out butterflies, they'll take out bees, they'll take out wasps, but they'll also known even to take out hummingbirds, which a lot of people find surprising. I don't recommend it if you're squeamish, but there are some both fascinating and very horrifying videos you can find on YouTube of hummingbirds coming in contact with praying mantises. Sometimes the hummingbirds win, and oftentimes they don't. So if you're squeamish, avoid it. But if you want to see some very fascinating yet horrifying images of hummingbirds fighting off praying mantises, you can definitely check those out on YouTube. I find that it's a great way for people to understand the problem with praying mantises. And of course, you want to cultivate native pollinators such as mason bees in the spring and leafcutter bees in the summer. Even though leafcutters aren't a native species, they were imported years ago. They are a great and very important summertime pollinator. Mason bees and leafcutter bees pollinate hundreds of times better than honeybees do. They're not collecting pollen to take back to feed anything except for their own young. And so they're not pushing pollen down into their little pollen baskets. They're actually dusting themselves with every flower they visit. And because of that, they visit many more flowers than a honeybee does in a single trip. A single mason bee is able to pollinate an entire apple tree on her own with no help from any other bees. And then, of course, place or leave dead wood and plants. And we'll talk more about how you can do that in a coming up slide. But here on the left, we have a great image that shows that natural succession I was talking about. You've got the ground layer here at the very bottom, which is your low ground cover, short bushes, things like that. And that's important habitat for birds like thrushes, wrens, towhees, any of your sparrows like the song sparrow. They require that sort of ground cover for nesting. It's where they find most of their food. And so having that low cover is a great, very important thing to have, which, just an open yard with no bushes, no ground cover doesn't really benefit these species very much. Maybe the thrushes a bit because they probe insects, larvae, and worms out of the ground. Like a good example of a thrush actually is the American robin. But there's no cover for them there. So, if a predator hawk or a cat comes by, they really have limited places to get away from them. The next is the shrub layer. So small to large shrubs to small trees. One example would be a honeysuckle. Trumpet honeysuckle is a native species of small shrub to tree we have in the area that provides great habitat for lots of animals. Lots of nectar as well. And that's an important area for flycatchers. That's where our goldfinches and juncos hang out. That's the layer you'll usually find hummingbirds getting their nectar and the insects they require for nutrition. And birds like bush tits, which glean insects off of shrubs. That's an important layer for them as well. The next level would be the understory canopy. So your shorter, more leafy trees, your deciduous trees, so to speak, maples, fruit trees, apple, things like that. And that's where you'll find short pines, Douglas firs. That's where you'll find a lot of owls, jays, kinglets, woodpeckers highly depend on that habitat, chickadees, nuthatches. So if you have that understory canopy nearby or in your own yard, you have a lot more of those species around. And then you have the overstory canopy, which is important for your, again, flycatchers, crossbills, all your swallows. They require those tall trees to land on and to take off from to catch lots of flying insects. Hawks use them to watch for meals as well as to rest on. Pigeons like that height, all your siskins. A lot of their natural food comes from pine cones, pine nuts, things like that, which are found in those overstory canopies. So having that succession, as you can see, you can get a much wider range of species of just birds. We're not even talking necessarily about the mammals that you can get in those sort of habitats as well. You know, an understory canopy and shrub layer will get you lots of the non-native eastern gray squirrels, but you're not really going to see your native Douglas squirrel. You're not going to see really any of our native chipmunks. You really need those taller overstory trees to start getting those native species. They don't do as well in our more sterile urban environment as the eastern gray squirrel does. And here's the snags, dead trees and limbs and brush piles. Again, doesn't look like there's much life going on in there, but there is. That snag is likely full of all sorts of different insects and beetles, which woodpeckers will come and feast upon. That's also the type of habitat a woodpecker would drill a natural cavity to nest in, would be in a dead standing tree like that. Your brush piles are amazing habitat. All your ground birds, your sparrows, towhees, juncos, they'll use them for cover and also to nest in. There's lots of native mammals that rely upon them. The bushy-tailed wood rat, for an example, is an amazing little creature. Also locally known as a pack rat. They'll naturally nest in a site like that. Lots of spiders depend on brush piles. And other important insects and other natural pest control. We don't necessarily like spiders in our houses, but they're good to have in the yard because they do catch and eat a lot of the insects that we would otherwise find a pest to us. And they're pretty simple. Brush piles, especially, really simple to add to a yard. Just find a corner that's not really utilized much and just start stacking your trimmed branches and, you know, scrap wood and logs in there. And before long, you'll have lots of happy critters. Bunnies use them to get out of predators' way, also to hunker down and build their nests in. Small mammals like moles, or not moles, but rather voles. Native rodents will utilize them as well. And so it's a really easy way to add a lot of habitat potential to your yard without much effort. Just pick a corner, start piling up some sticks, and you're probably double the amount of critters you have in your yard. And then, you know, trees, snakes can be a little bit more difficult to add to a yard. So ways you can add dead wood to your yard. You can take a dead or dying tree and top it off to 15, 20 feet high. That way it remains standing, but isn't going to be a danger if it falls. Years later, when the roots rot out or give out, you know, if it's only 15, 20 feet high and it has good clearance around it, it's not going to fall on your roof. It's not going to fall on your neighbor's fence. Won't fall on your car. You can, if you don't have any dead or dying trees, but you want to provide a snag in your yard, you can girdle a tree, which is just cutting around the base of the tree deep enough to get into the capillaries of the tree, effectively starving it from nutrition and water at that point, and it will slowly die and provide egg standing for you. If you don't want to do that to an entire tree, you can take a healthy tree that has some large branches and just girdle one or two branches. The tree will cut those branches off from their circulatory system and they will die, but they will remain attached to the tree, which provides lots of great perches for birds and animals. It will also provide a place for insects to start colonizing, which will give food to many birds like woodpeckers. And so that way you're not killing an entire tree, but you're still providing that dead wood, which is an important form of habitat. If you, you know, logs, again, are another great source. It doesn't necessarily have to be a standing tree. It just caters to different sorts of critters. So you can fell a tree and leave it as a downed log, or you can move in a downed tree, a log, and place it on your property. Again, building piles of sticks, branches, and brush for a brush pile. And another simple, say you don't really have any trees in your yard, you're just dealing with a base, you know, sterile, nice looking cultivated yard, and you don't really have much going in the way yet, and you're just starting out, get some dead branches and attach them to a fence or a post. You can attach them with some hardware cloth or some hardware tape, and that provides a more natural look and feel to your yard for animals. They'll be more comfortable, and you'll be providing some dead wood. And then another way to do it is what they call planting a snag. And that is, again, bring in a dead tree, and then you dig down several feet, like 5 or 6 feet deep, and you place the tree in the ground like a post. And then you build it back up around it. Maybe you can, even if you really want it to be sturdy, you can throw some concrete around it like you would a post. And that way you're providing a standing dead tree that, you didn't have to grow. You didn't have to girdle a tree. It was already dead. But now your yard has that great habitat source. And this here is an example of a standing snag someone has left in their yard on their property for wildlife. Looks like this tree might have been a lightning strike. It burned out. Hard to say whether it was moved in or there naturally. Being that's a lightning strike like that, it was probably moved in. But they've placed, there's a birdhouse on it. It's also a great place for bats. Naturally, they'll utilize a snag like this to roost in. It's also a great place to attach a bat house to provide a place for bats. And that's the other features you can add. Some more, our modern features. You can add nest boxes. So you don't necessarily have to have a tree for woodpeckers to drill nests into if you provide a flicker box or a woodpecker house for them. Same with chickadees, nuthatches. You could have several banks of houses for swallows. Most birds don't like nesting by other birds. They want some, less activity in the area. So generally, most species won't choose a house that's right next to another house birds are already nesting in, with the exception of swallows. Swallows like nesting near other swallows. They're a very gregarious form of bird when it comes to their nesting, and they prefer nesting in groups. So you can get several swallow houses up on a fence or a post or the side of the house and provide habitat for them rather than depending on a dead snag with cavities made by woodpeckers. You can provide, again, bat houses, great natural insect control during the summer. They're amazing critters to have around, and they're having some trouble naturally due to a fungus known as white nose syndrome that's been moving into the States over the past decade or two. And it has made its way all the way. East Coast has been hit a lot harder, but it has been found in Washington in a couple counties. So it's really important to be able to provide new sources of habitat for bats, so that they're able to weather the seriousness of this fungus that's actually able to wipe out entire colonies of thousands of bats. You can provide feeders, so if you don't have a lot of space to plant seed bearing and fruit bearing plants, you can just put up a feeder pole with a couple feeders with sunflower or Niger thistle. Put a ground tray down with some millet, which is a form of grass seed that the ground birds really like. And then again, this time of year, especially this coming weekend, water, bird baths or small fountains or ponds are going to be so important this weekend for wildlife. As hot as it's getting, there's going to be very little natural water available. And the hotter it gets, the more water animals need, just like we do. And so having a bird bath out, or even if you don't have a bird bath, I would recommend setting out a saucer of water and keeping it fresh throughout the day this weekend, so that your wild animals, who aren't going to be very active anyways because it's so hot, but at least they'll have some source of water available to them without having to go searching for it in the heat. Just place it in some place in your yard in the shade. It could simply be a base of a pot, like a pot liner, that you would sit a potted plant in. It could just be a simple shallow bowl or plate that holds about an inch or so of water. Just keep it cool, keep it fresh, and they will be greatly benefited by that this weekend. Bee and insect houses, you can pick up mason bee blocks, and they're a natural occurring bee that will move in on their own or during early spring, around February, you can buy bees as well in cocoons that you can place in the houses and kind of jumpstart things. So that way you'll have them for sure. They also make ladybug houses for ladybugs to winter in. And there's also butterfly houses. I don't know how well they're used in our area, but other parts of the country, they're readily used by butterflies. And then, just drilling some holes in a post or a piece of wood and putting it up, various different size holes will attract various different types of insects and increase that diversity of um, animals in your yard, which will increase the other types. They're different bugs, different food for different critters. So it's not a bad thing to have lots of different types of insects visiting your yard. It's a sign of a healthy yard. The more life that lives in your yard, the healthier your yard is. Some great local resources for backyard habitat. There's backyardhabitats.org, and they offer a backyard habitat certification through the Watershed Alliance, Audubon, and Columbia Land Trust, where they actually have different categories that you can, increase your yard. So you can start out and go to a tier 1 yard, which I believe is, starting your understory, your successive ground cover, putting a few houses and habitat up. And then you get certified at that level, and they give you some little gift cards, gift certificates for various businesses in the area to help continue things. And then you work your way up the tiers until you have a fully, full succession yard, all the way from ground cover to upper canopy. And they give you all, information and all the resources of how to go about doing that. Another great resource is the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they actually have a backyard wildlife sanctuary program where you go in, and there's different things you need to meet, such as you need to provide a bird bath or some form of water for wildlife. You need to have nesting habitat, so bird houses, some bird feeders to provide. Effectively, you're meeting all those points we talked about earlier that is what habitat is. So you need to offer some sort of food and water. You need to offer some sort of shelter and cover, and you need to offer, some space for the population to grow. And meeting those points allows you to be certified with the Fish and Wildlife as a backyard wildlife sanctuary. We actually have a small feeder area here at the store behind it that we have certified as a backyard wildlife sanctuary. We don't currently have a birdhouse out there anymore, mainly because it was out there for dozens of years and was never ever nested in. It's just back right next to our habitat back there is a walkway that services all the different stores here in the complex. And so there's just way too much activity right there for them to choose to nest there. But there's everything else that is required for habitat we've provided for them in that space. And we're in an industrial business park area. So, it's not a lot to work with, but we've done what we can. And we've had over 50 different species of birds, not counting just about any sort of mammal you can think of that, lives in the city. And that's what I have to talk about as far as the presentation is concerned. But like my favorite part is the Q&A, which we can get started and answering your questions. Hopefully I can clear up or touch on more points that you want to know about.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone, in case some people have come in later, that right now the chat's been turned on, and so there's an icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, and if you just click on chat, you can type your question in, and then Brendan can answer it, and I'll be here in case we need any moderating. Okay. I'll we've got a question. Do you see
Yeah.
that? Okay. Mhm.
From Laura. She's interested in installing bird feeders, but became hesitant when she started hearing about bacteria and other issues that spread by feeders that can harm birds. How can she ensure that her feeders are only helpful and not harmful? Well, the important thing with that is, while yes, they can be a source, because any place that animals gather in large quantities, there's always a potential of spreading disease or sickness, bacteria between them. What we can do to ensure that doesn't happen is to clean your feeders regularly. And so what you want to do with your feeders is take them down. Preferably, you'd want to do this once a month. But honestly, if you're doing it every other month, you're still doing better than the majority of people who feed birds. Take them down, give them a good scrub, soap and water, wash them really well. If you have been seeing sick birds or you're worried about sick birds, you can also give them a dip in 1 part water, 10 parts, or sorry, 1 part bleach, 10 parts water, and that will sterilize and kill any bacteria or viruses that might have been building up on your feeders. And so just cleaning them regularly and sterilizing them occasionally will pretty much negate really that worry of spreading sickness. It's also usually only a problem that comes up in mass. Like this year, we had what we called a super flight or super bloom of pine siskins. Pine siskins seem to have the weakest immune system of all our feeder birds I've ever seen. Every year that they show up in mass, there's always a small outbreak of salmonella. But this year, all across the country, there were so many of them, we had a full-blown, almost pandemic of salmonella occurring at bird feeders. And so they recommended you take your feeders down for a couple months to allow the bacteria to work its way through the flock so it wasn't spreading anymore as quickly. But yeah, just simply sterilizing everything. We had our feeders here at the store only down for a couple weeks. And just that couple weeks was enough to work through the flock here at the store. And when we put them back up about 3 weeks later, we did it over the New Year's break. Our birds have been healthy ever since. So it's not something that happens often, and it's easily solvable just by keeping things clean. And then, of course, you can always come into the store and we're happy to go over all the different feeders, what ones are easier to take care of versus which ones are not. But hopefully that answers your question. Let's see, we got Brandy who she's going to get more plants. Yep. Yeah. Go to the nurseries and ask for as many local species of plants as you can get your hands on. And that will really boost up your diversity in your yard. There is always a chance. Dawn is asking about sometimes they have ant problems. Will putting out dead wood increase the ants that come into our house? Well, the ants, oftentimes the ants that are infesting our house are the sugar ants, and they tend to make colonies in our walls or in our crawl spaces, not so much in wood. They're after sweet sucrose and things like that. Now our other wild ants that would be in the yard, they may be attracted to the wood. Things like termites potentially could. But that's why I recommend, putting that dead wood out in a corner of your yard, not necessarily right up against the house. And that gives you a chance to kind of keep control over that sort of thing a little bit. Also, if the ants move into the dead wood, that's going to attract animals like flickers and other animals that eat ants. And so once those animals show up, you'll start to have a natural back and forth of habitat. And so the food chain will build up in your yard. And so the birds and mammals that move in that eat ants will help keep that ant population under control. Next, we have Tori asking some questions about mason bees. She wants to know, they put up a mason bee house this year and got some filled up tubes and want to know what to do now. Now that I like, back up a little bit with mason bees. I like holidays to easy to remember things about them. So Valentine's Day, think the birds and the bees. That's when you want to get your bee houses out and your bird houses cleaned up and out and ready for the nesting season. Mason bees start as early as late February, early March, and some birds start nesting as soon as they get back into town. So if it's a warmer year and they get back into town earlier, potentially they could be nesting earlier too. So it's a good time to get all your bird houses and bee houses ready. The next important holiday to remember for mason bees is 4th of July. By 4th of July, the mason bees should be they're done. They're no longer coming and going. They're mudded up holes. And this is when you can safely put up a predator guard without worrying of trapping any mason bees outside or inside the house. And that's just a solid barrier or a mesh barrier you actually cover up the holes with. And it provides a solid barrier against predators like woodpeckers and squirrels pulling them out and eating them. And the meshes help keep parasitic wasps and Houdini flies, which are two parasitic and harmful insects that prey upon our mason bee houses. And so 4th of July is a good time to put all that stuff up. The next important holiday is Halloween. Really, it can be any time in October, but it's easier for me to remember Halloween than just October in general. And that's when you want to, if you're going to go through the process of cleaning your cocoons and storing them safely through the winter, that would be the time to bring your houses in and collect the cocoons and clean them up and store them in a cool place for the winter safely. You really don't want to move the houses much around before that because the larva is immobile. And if it falls off its food stores, it can't crawl back on and continue eating, so it tends to starve. So you want to wait until that cocoon has finished eating, or the larva rather has finished eating and has spun its cocoon, which come October, they should all be fully developed bees hibernating their cocoons at that point. And so they're safe to handle at that point without worrying of killing a bunch of larvae. Next question we got from Marlene. They're seeing fewer birds in the areas, but the ones that have visited lately are the starlings, less desirable. We're not seeing a huge variety at the store right now. This time of year, some of the birds are still finishing up their nesting. Also, different birds move to different parts of town. For example, goldfinches. We have almost no goldfinches here at the store during the spring and summer. They move out more to outlying areas near open fields and thickets along open fields. That's where they breed, and think places that thistle would naturally grow. And that's their summer habitat and breeding habitat. But during fall and winter, they tend to move back into town where it's warmer. And so fall and winter, we will have dozens upon dozens of goldfinches here at the store and at our houses in town. But you won't see really any out in the outlying areas in the county either because they've all moved into town. So especially as it gets hot, it's also not uncommon to see a decrease in bird activity. They don't like being out in this heat any more than we do. So they're going to find places where it's shady and cool and they have access to water nearby. Even their feeder and food activity tends to go down in the heat, much like us. When it's really hot and you're miserable, you just really don't feel like eating much. Same goes for them. Helen has a question of, do we have any ideas for do-it-yourself hummingbird sprinklers or an inexpensive, easy to install fountain? Yes, we have a couple options here at the store. One's called a mister that just hooks up to a faucet and it sprays a fine mist out into the air. Hummingbirds love them. Another is we actually have a solar bubbler in stock right now, which is just a small little floating solar fountain you put in a bird bath. And it's run directly by the sun, doesn't have a battery backup or anything, so only works when the sun's shining on it, but it's a great way to add moving water easily. Just place it out where it gets some sunlight and away it goes. We also have some bubbler options for that require an outlet. So you just run an extension cord out to them, seal the connection with some either what they call a cord connector or, honestly, some electrical tape wrapped around the connection tightly should seal it against any water this time of year. And that allows you to provide a fountain or bubbler inside a bird bath or a small pool during this weather as well, simply and easily. Rachel recently bought a flicker house. Any idea where to place it and how high? Flickers like kind of an open fly area to it. Honestly, the side of a house works great. Generally, you want to get them 10 feet or higher. And also with a flicker house, you want to fill it up with wood shavings. They like to, even though it's already provided open cavity for them, they still like to dig it out. And so they will filling it up with shavings makes it more attractive to them to be able to move in, and they'll move in and kick out a bunch of the shavings and then use the remainder to start the base of their nest in. And we have lots of resources here in the store too. But But yeah, doesn't matter so much sun or shade, but so long as you got it at least about 10 feet high, and in a good flight path for them, you should have success. Tori put up a basalt fountain last fall, and the birds, yes, robins, hummingbirds. You probably even occasionally get a hawk in there, I bet. Basalt fountains they're a lot of fun. My dad's has one he's trying to build and has been trying to build for the last dozen years or so. One day he'll get it finished. Yeah, that water, again, moving water is such a huge attractant to birds and all wildlife. It really does in nature. The moving water is a difference between life and death. It's fresh water versus contaminated water. So, are there any other questions or any follow-up questions to the points I've already touched on? Some of the woodpeckers may still be nesting now. We've still got swallows are just starting their nesting right now, especially the cavity nester ones, the violet green and the tree swallow, but also barn swallows have begun nesting. There may still be a few straggler chickadees or nuthatches doing their second or so brood. Robins are probably coming to a close, although they're known to do several nests a year. And then I don't think any of the raptors are currently nesting, but some of them may still be. Another important part of habitat are raptors or predator birds. They really do help keep the population healthy. And that question earlier about the disease in a bird feeder, a lot of people don't like to see it, but it's not a bad thing to have a hawk hunting your feeders. Just like with wolves and elk and deer, they tend to pick off the sick and the weak more so than the healthy individuals. And so they actually improve the health of your population. If there's an outbreak of salmonella starting and a hawk comes by, they're more likely to catch the birds that are sick and going to be spreading the disease than the healthy birds who haven't yet caught it. So hawks are, even though you might see a decrease in your feeder activity for a few days after they've shown up, they really are doing a lot to help keep your population healthy. They're a really important part of the ecosystem and just the natural food chain. Without predators, we see a lot more sickness and death, which is a much worse way to go than, quickly being snapped up by some talons. Marlene has stickers on her windows, but are still getting some bird strikes. First thing, a lot of the stickers out there these days are UV reflective, meaning they just look like frosted glass or a clear film to us, but the birds see them as glowing bright blue purple because they can actually see the UV spectrum, which we cannot. But for something to be UV reflective, it can't be UV neutral. And so eventually that UV reflectiveness does bake out of them. And so UV stickers you need to replace every 4 to 6 months usually, or if it's a window that doesn't get a lot of sunlight, you might be able to stretch it out a year. But they definitely do need to be replaced every year if they're UV reflective. Putting up some non-UV reflective solid ones, you don't have to replace them as often because they're not necessarily baking out, so they're more visible to the birds. But sometimes you see an increase in strikes depending on the time of year, usually transition periods, usually spring and fall transitions tend to see an increase in strikes. And I think it has to do with the angle the sun comes in. It tends to turn our windows into mirrors. And so it just looks like a continuation of the yard to them. And that can be a little harder to stop during those times. Adding some extra stickers or a UV window paint that's easy to wash off but goes on clear can help with that during those times. Also, though, sometimes strikes just happen. Either they're not paying attention or something startles them. The fight and flight mechanism is a big part of it. If something's startling them and they're not just flying because they want to be flying in that direction, they don't even look. So say a hawk shadow goes over them and they, oh, I'm going to get eaten, I need to run. They don't even look where they're going necessarily at first. And so you see some increased strikes from that. And then sometimes predators like Cooper's hawks or sharp-shinned hawks learn to drive birds into windows. And they realize if they chase the bird at that window, it's going to knock itself silly and they have an easy meal. Again, this is actually kind of a smart thing for them to figure out and do. And again, no one likes to see it, but sometimes what helps is when people learn that 80% of raptors die in their first year, and 80% of the ones that survive their first year die in their second year. And they usually die of starvation. It's because they just learning to hunt and meet their energy demands when they have to catch other animals to eat it's a very steep learning curve, and you have to be really good at it to survive. And so the birds that just don't figure it out don't survive. But birds that tend to figure out they can drive birds in the windows, they're going to be more likely to survive because they found an easy, quicker way to catch their prey. And at least, that bird's going to get eaten. Its death serves a purpose rather than one that just accidentally flew into the window. So nothing we want to see, but not necessarily a bad thing. Marlene's now asking, in the spring, early in the morning, they had flickers pounding on their gutters and roof like jackhammers. That is part of their mating behavior. It's a territorial thing. It's called drumming. And what they do is they find a hollow piece of metal or wood or something that makes a lot of echoing noise, and they pound on it with their beaks rapidly. And the idea behind that is it's the males usually that do this, although females occasionally do it as well, but it's hammering out their territory. What it's telling males is, hey, if you can hear this, you're in my territory, get out. And it's telling females, hey, look how big my territory is, come see me. And so the louder item they can find, the better. And so they tend to like gutter downspouts. They like chimney flues. They like metal flashing or siding, really anything that has a little bit of hollowness behind it that will make a good echoey carrying pounding sound is fair game to them. Some things you can do to prevent it is they make a product called scare tape, which is a strip of mylar that's been laser etched to be shiny and flashy. And you cut off 2 or 3 foot lengths of that and tack it above or to the item that they're drumming on. And it will blow in the wind and flash in the sun. And oftentimes that will startle them away. And since it's something that keeps moving, it tends to keep them away. And so that's one thing you can do. Do sapsuckers that make holes along a row in a birch tree harming the trees? Not usually. They're not usually making them very deep. They're just making the holes deep enough to start oozing sap. It's what we actually call it a sapsucker well, because it's a place that they'll go back to time and time again to one, get the sweet sap, but also as the sap rolls down, it traps insects, which they eat. So it's a great source of both energy and nutrition for them, and other birds also are known to raid sapsucker wells also. But they're very shallow, and they tend to do them in a block pattern. And then they, once they have them made, so long as they keep oozing, they'll visit the same wells over and over again until one dries up. Then they'll have to make some fresh ones. But it shouldn't really be doing much harm to the trees. They're not going very deep. I mean, any scar in a tree potentially could introduce bacteria or fungus. But there's all sorts of animals out there using trees to live in such a fashion. So it shouldn't be too big of a problem, no. Have you had the sapsucker previously, or is this a new sapsucker visitor? Because the sapsuckers might have something to do with that, the tentworms. If they're there with their sapsucker wells, they very well may be eating the larva of the tentworms. Yeah, so I bet you have fewer tent worms because of the sapsuckers there. Another thing you can do when you notice tent worms is if you take a stick and poke a hole through their webbing into the center, oftentimes yellow jackets will find that and start going in and clearing them out. The tent webbing stuff actually serves to keep predator insects like the yellow jackets out of their nests. And so, but if you break an opening into it, that will often allow the yellow jackets to help with that infestation. Yeah, they can be, and it'd be hard to reach those ones. But near the lower ones, like I said, if you can poke a hole in it, it's one time. Yellow jackets aren't a bad insect; they're considered a good insect. They're just nuisances to us and are wanting to have picnics. But they usually take out a lot more bad insects than they do good insects, and they are a predator. If, for example, the tent worms, having their tent caterpillars, having them around hunting those is a great thing. We just don't want them, coming into our fried chicken and our sweet drinks when we're trying to enjoy a cool summer day on the porch. Any other questions today? All right, looks like maybe we're finishing up here. Thank you all for coming to my presentation. This is one of my shorter ones, but I feel it's also one of the more important ones to, start educating folks on the difference between a monoculture and and habitat, and how important it is to have diversity in our yards.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Brandon, for that. Great information, really appreciate it. And thank you, NatureScaping, Marlene. Marlene, did you have anything to say before we close up?
Oops, I had to turn my microphone back on. No, just again, we encourage everybody to come to NatureScaping and check us out if you haven't done it. We are located in Brush Prairie near the Casey Center. If you know where that is, you're not familiar, we will be having our Art in the Garden event in July 11th. Obviously last year we didn't have it, and we're going to have it this year. Artists will be there to show their wares in and amongst the various garden paths. We'll have musicians and yarn spinning demonstrations, and let's hope for not this heat, and that we'll have a great day and come and enjoy. And it's a good way to get familiar with the gardens.
And I just want to say that their gardens out there are amazing and well worth a check out. And membership to NatureScaping in Southwest Washington is well worth it for all the different presentations they put on. They've invited me out many times to speak out there. I've enjoyed it every time. But there are a lot more speakers they have come out than just myself. And so it's a great wealth of information and a really good group of people. And the gardens, again, are amazing.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, because all of our gardeners are volunteers, and we definitely could use some volunteer help if anyone's interested in working in the gardens as well. But that's what's even more amazing is the amount of time our gardeners put into it, and we really appreciate it. And the gardens are used by a vast number of different groups of people, a lot of photographers, and some groups meet there and have their meetings. There's picnic tables and benches. There's a gazebo to sit under. So yes, please do come. And there's actually a master composter recycling demonstration area in the very end of the garden. So learn how to do that composting that Brandon mentioned is very important to our environment as well. So thank you all very much.
And if you ever have any questions about birds or wildlife, feel free to come on into the store. We're always happy to help. And all my coworkers are just as knowledgeable about topics like this as I am, if not more so in some areas. So
I agree. Ditto on that. They're great people there, and they have beautiful, wonderful artsy things too. And it's I have to pull myself away every time I'm there. So yes, please do.
All right, well, everyone have a wonderful day and stay cool.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks again, Brandon. All right. Thanks again, Marlene. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.